As usual, another great guest, but a quick diversion. You'll notice that our full name is the Marketplace for Health, Wealth, and Freedom. Well, let's talk about your health for a moment. If you'd like to escape from the stranglehold of insurance and be able to see alternative doctors or go across state lines for care, then you definitely need to take a look at patientempowerment.mpb.health and see if that's the fix you've been looking for. Now, let's get back to the show.
Welcome, folks, to Freedom Hub's weekly cash patient free market webinar, otherwise known as Health, Business, and Politics. We'll figure out the name eventually, Jim. Today is a great webinar, and I think I'm starting to say that every week, aren't I? So maybe I should change that, Jim. But Tom's an old friend, apparently not only of mine, but also of yours, Jim.
That's right.
I met him in the mid-2000s when in the DC area, I was a teacher of Kundalini Yoga as well as a lobbyist. And maybe it was at the Spiral Flight studio in Georgetown, Tom, where I met you. And I was like, I love high-level successful people who incorporate Kundalini Yoga or any other spiritual path, Jim, even your karate.
Thanks.
You're more than that. I'm just joking. But Tom was a doctor, and I had doctors in my yoga class, and Tom was a high-level neurologist who just decided, I guess, he'll tell us his story. He'll tell us his story, how he wants to tell it. But that's my connection with Tom. And then later in the years, I learned that he's one of the pioneers in gut health, which everyone with an open mind in healthcare knows you have to learn because there's something to it. It's pretty darn important. In fact, Jim, you rewrote the invitation for today's event in a really nice way. So I just totally copied and pasted your corrections over everything. How gut health starts. Chronic disease starts and ends in your gut. I like how you phrase that because chronic disease is something I always raise as the real epidemic. It's risen from single digits to over half the population since the 80s. And allopathic mainstream medicine has been helpless to stop that explosion. And I think a majority of Americans are consulting Dr. Google and their chiropractor and naturopaths to figure out how to heal themselves. So there's a curiosity and a demand to learn about these integrated doctors, these naturopaths, these osteopaths who have a broader understanding of the body. And that understanding is still minuscule. There are so many mysteries of the body, and Tom definitely talked that up a year or two ago when he last presented on the webinar. He has worked at Georgetown and I think the Mind Body Center. So he keeps his connection with high-level mainstreamers who are curious about this natural health thing. I think Cleveland Clinic even has an integrated aspect to that center of excellence. Jim, you know Tom too a bit from the past and have some comments on gut health, and I'll let you kind of transition it from here.
Thanks, Charlie. Yes, we're from the same area and go back a number of years. I think actually it was more in the yoga realm when I met Tom. That was your focus, right, Tom? Yoga back years ago.
My focus was trying to not have a focus, I believe.
I think you might be right.
Dissipating focus, yeah.
Disciplining focus. Before
But yeah, you were a bright light in my lady's sound healing. She was doing crystal bowl work and you were working the pendulum and you were just radiant. And I said, I gotta know that guy.
So it's you've come now you're working in this area that is so important. I mean, as you know, I've become a biofeedback practitioner. And the first thing I look at, I mean, when I see everybody these days, it's their vitamins and minerals deficiencies, too much, not enough. I mean, that's where I think everybody should be starting is working on the gut and what's going into the body and being really careful about that. I just want to point out, let me share the screen for a second. So just like 2 days ago, it showed up on my mailbox. an article from the Epic Times. Can you see it? How to heal your gut naturally.
Yes.
So yeah, it's kind of cool. I mean, it is starting to, I'll shut this off now. Starting to become more accepted and understanding, which you'd think, hello, I mean, we've heard you are what you eat, you know, since we've been kids. So it makes sense. I don't know what happened with medicine, but yeah, we do. That's another story. Okay, so back to you, Charlie or Tom, if you're ready. What do you think? Should we turn it over to Tom?
That's a good idea.
Okay. Welcome.
You're up,
Thank
Tom.
you, guys. Thank you both. And everybody who's here. Thanks for whatever it took to be here today. I was thinking about the word crisis this morning, and we're in crisis times and crisis change, and we think that's a negative sometimes. And I'll talk about inflammation today, and I often suggest that inflammation is the pointer. And I'll talk about physiology if you want to. I don't know how much nuts and bolts you want about it, but the crisis at the social level, social fabric inflammation, is an opportunity for a teacher, and I would suggest maybe even a ballistic call to action, not just an opportunity, but a mandate. Charlie, your language about freedom and the freedom to step into personal sovereignty, right? We believe we're individual organisms. I like to use the phrase humanity as organism thrives, and where we're connected, we're well. And there, in the different kingdoms of life, in the animal kingdom, we've suggested that there is individualization, individuation is the word I'm looking for, I suppose. But we're not separate, we can't be. And so a lot of my work is, over the past couple of decades, has gotten closer and closer to the idea of how do we sacredly interface. And think of all the ways that you contact life. So take a deep breath. In fact, that'd be a nice way to start. Why don't we all just take a nice centering breath? And even as I'm exhaling, supposedly exhaling with my speech, I can continue to inhale, and let yourself go beyond your normal inhale with a certain comfort level. And I would suggest that you're actually being inflamed right now. If you can hold that breath in and sip just a little bit more, we're creating some intercostal muscle tension that we are not used to. And we're creating just a tiny bit of intra-alveolar balloon filling stress tension that we're not used to. Okay, exhale and let it out, let it out, let it out, let it out. And just notice your toes and your back and your posture and your contact, how you're sitting, how the planet's supporting you. That's an inflammatory process right there. It's not an evil. Yeah. As we contact the planet, we learn there's an interface there. So it's what we breathe. It's if you practiced any kind of athletic challenge this morning, you probably didn't stay inside your sweet spot, right? You probably found a certain amount of discomfort somewhere. And intuitively, we have that drive. That is the essential and metaphysical pilot light for life going forward. So all that is a very long explanation to say there is a ballistic craving for inflammation and inflammatory contact. So we can demonize a lot of the political fabric that has a lot of people flipped out. The silver lining to that is, I thought when they first closed the nation, I thought, well, at least this is an opportunity to step into the conversation that I've been carrying for a long time, which is we're very fragile metabolically. We're very much more fragile than we were 100 years ago. Autoimmune disease did not exist 100 years ago. cancer didn't exist, autism didn't exist. A lot of the diseases that anything we have a DSM code for these days, really is an environmental, an epigenetic, and learned pathology, with a few exceptions, of course. But realistically, we knew how to interface. And I would suggest that the progression of the what are now terrifying densities of disease and pathology, both of spirit and body, are because of our separation from those natural processes. Eating things, well, not even eating food, it can't be classified as food. Chewing and swallowing things that have been separated from earth and really aren't alive anymore. Chewing and swallowing tormented foods, whether that be unhappy animals or some life form, some plant form that was vital once and went through its own versions of torment, call it highly processed. I can talk about processed oils and whatnot if you like, in that vein as well. But and then we sequestered ourselves. We put ourselves in little rooms, separated ourselves from wide spectrum light. We separated ourselves from the geomagnetics of the earth, both from below and above. Glyphosate in the soil and destruction of the earth's crust, the wisdom of the crust. And I'd like to talk, Charlie, about fungal interaction. When I talk about brain health, I'll talk about the brain of the earth as well, being the mycelia, which is the natural reflection of soil health. And really, it makes up a massive, probably 20% of the mass of our globe. We destroyed that from below. And so the brain of the earth was removed with glyphosate and other toxins. Our deep oceans were also sterilized as plastics accumulate, and a lot of our ocean life is destroyed. Very realistic projections that about 90 to 95% of the biodiversity, the different species that are on our globe right now, within 100 years, going to be gone. That's very believable. So we did it from below, and then all of a sudden, here come frequencies like 5G, which not only do we sequester ourselves inside artificial structure, but we've actually put another blanket of interference around our globe. And so in our solar system, there are plenty of interactions that we depended on for a long time. One is solar energy, of course. It can also be argued that there are yet unknown extra Milky Way, extra celestial frequencies that we have gotten in the way of. So we're blanketed, we're sterilized. I didn't know I was going to go down that rabbit hole. I'm always curious when I get in the midst of creative listeners. I was talking last week about hopefully being surprised by the end of my sentences. And so I want to honor everybody for being here, for being attentive. And Charlie, when you were talking about integrative physicians, just one more point, and then I'll flip it back to you to have, you can help me structure a curriculum here. But when you're talking about integrative practitioners, and you don't have to have letters behind your name to be a healer, by the way. We are all healers of the ecosystems in which we find ourselves, our families, our institutions where we work, our communities, our various tribes, and where we're connected, we're well, where we are interrelated. There is an emergent phenomenon, which is the wisdom of a community. And I'll talk about the emergent wisdom of the community of bacteria in our gut today as the microbiome, but zoom out in the world of how we've always healed. We've always healed in a doctor-patient relationship, whether you're a trained physician or not. We've always healed in a doctor-patient relationship, parent-child, and neither is superior. That is a that's a relationship that exists to the benefit of both parent and child, and to the benefit of both healer and, quote, patient, or one who seeks help. And so in that space, the point I wanted to make was, I don't believe that it is a rare phenomena. It's my belief. I haven't traveled all of the world, but allopathic physician and the idea that traditional allopathy is, quote, the dominant ideology, has somehow taken ground. So it's actually a very tiny piece of ideologic healing. And most of the practitioners all over the world are the kind of exploratory spirit, I think, that when you step into med school, you want to step into a place where you're always going to learn. And that's a healthy, thriving creature. And I think all of us qualify as healer and healthy, thriving creature, where interdisciplinary pursuit and interdisciplinary navigation of life is the mandate. And to the extent that we separate ourselves from that understanding, we separate ourselves from the life force, the vital force, the chi, whatever your version of God is, whatever your version of I am connected, right? That's the intuition. So we'll probably bring it back from all of that into some nuts and bolts physiology, but I'll pause there, Charlie. Where do you want me to go from there? Or if anybody has any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. We can.
How about your story of how you got from a neurologist to what you're doing now?
Yeah, I don't know how many weeks people have here, and I haven't finished the story yet. But yeah, I left the Department of Neurology at Georgetown. Actually went into medicine thinking I was going to be a psychiatrist. So I do love meds. People hear me speak sometimes and they think I'm anti-pharmaceutical. Actually went into psychiatry, thought I was going into psychiatry, went to med school thinking I was going to learn more about these SSRIs. In the 80s and 90s, they were first coming out with neuroleptics and chemicals that could actually change the brain. That was fascinating to me. So then I got lost in neurology, got lost in autoimmune neurology, practiced as an MS neurologist, multiple sclerosis neurologist at Georgetown. So my background and specialty is in autoimmune. Today, I know that gut rebuild, I can talk about the mechanics of that if you like, but that dynamic I mentioned earlier of separating ourselves from the planet, all of the tens of thousands of other species of life that make this thing up, bacteria, virus, fungus, parasite, things we probably don't even know yet, the epigenetic management, that's 99+++ % of the information, the metabolic information that the body produces. It's not the human DNA that creates that. So when we talk about epigenetic control, we're talking about that to the extent that we've separated ourselves from life with antibiotics and with hormone disruptors and with fake food, and we don't bring along those life forms that we used to chew and swallow, sometimes intentionally, sometimes accidentally. Therein is the proper response of the body, which is an immune response and an attack response and a self-destruction response. So that's not just multiple sclerosis. That's actually Crohn's disease, that's rheumatoid arthritis, it's Lyme, it's you name it, Hashimoto's, everything that we call autoimmune. And then when I realized that much of the immune competence of the body that comes from microbiome reconstruction, similar tissue regeneration in an oncogenic response. So where the body is constantly scanning and looking for a pathology, looking for the cells that are not doing the job and should be shuttled away today, right? We create 500 billion cells every day and we let go of 500 billion cells every day. And that, so oncogenic survey, which is the body's ability to detect first cancerous change, similar. So I work with a lot of cancer, I work with a lot of autoimmune. And then over the years, just started learning. It was about 15 years ago, I started learning food as medicine interventions. The first real light bulb that went on was working with a pretty famous Parkinsonian neurologist whose name you'd recognize, who was doing fecal transplants for autism, and with profound results. Literally, you could take a head-banging autistic, repetitive behavior, and in 36 hours, that kid's normal. You put him back in his environment where he's toxifying his body and destroying his microbiome, he's going to be back again. But that first lit the light bulb. And really interestingly, that guy's not jumping up and down. I heard him speak in Denver at one of his book launches. I thought the guy was going to win a Nobel Prize. And if you hear him today, he says things very equivocally, which he'll say something like, "Oh, it appears that there might be some evidence that food might contribute to neurological competence." But he won't put the disease state in there because he's still got a license, right? And I think, he, like so many other beautiful, beautiful practitioners who dove deep into this 30, 40 years ago and found thousands of cases of clinical success. One very famous one, there's a book called Reversing Alzheimer's. Again, I won't use the author's name, but The End of Alzheimer's. And I won't dive into the politics there unless you want me to, but that's just to illustrate that what I kept my license for a while, Jimmy. I kept my license for about 10 years. And I was a certified, I am a certified practitioner with the Center for Mind Body Medicine at Georgetown, in addition to being on staff at the Department of Neurology. So I went on sabbatical from my neurological career for about 6 months to take care of my family. And here I am a decade and a half later, still on sabbatical. I accidentally bought a yoga studio, met you guys, that turned into 2 more. That turned into me paying attention to all kinds of energy workers and other holistic healers and realizing that these allopaths really were the minority. They just happen to have a big microphone. And then over the years, really realized, wow, this is a profound way to heal. This is a profound way to get people back together where they have not just physical health, but emotional health. And then I started working with kids. We have a program, I have a nonprofit that brings yoga and meditation into schools. We did that for many years, and it's in the past few years taken the slant of garden to table school lunch programs, because we're systematically slaughtering our kids in the schools, right? Who knows if that's intentional or not, but it's unarguable. And so that's a big deal for me. And I think that's probably my big commitment in the coming years is, I call it food as leadership, where kids are healthy physically, their brains are constantly restructuring and just naturally gravitating into that sense of curiosity and hunger that I was pointing out earlier.
So that's, you've discovered that antibiotics and some of the frankenfoods or general, just the foods that are out there, certainly fast foods, have been causing problems in gut health, which then causes depression or mental health problems, right? Because of the connection. And I suppose you also discovered that your SSRIs and some of the other neuroleptics, different modern pharmaceuticals are also disrupting the gut. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's, yeah.
I have a question. And folks, if you see the reactions tab around your Zoom controls, you'll see the raise hand icon. So let's get the questions going. I have a number of questions, Jim, I'm sure you do. First, a comment. It's kind of funny. Tom, you said you were laughing as you spoke, how your conversation ended up down a rabbit hole, and you were curious where your conversation was going to end. And I grok that kind of thinking. I was interviewed yesterday in a podcast for doctors. I'm not sure why they interviewed me, because I certainly triggered them a bit. And it was a fun round of questions. And one was, what's the last book you're reading? And instead of thinking of some, mainstream how-to consultant book, I just thought about the last book I read. It was a Sitchin book on the Sumerian tablets, Jim. So, maybe the rabbit holes are coming out of the mouths of the leaders, Tom, like you, me, and others, to really push the envelope on the curiosity needed to get folks thinking about these comprehensive things. And you really laid out a very comprehensive, accurate layering of the separation, down inside deep with the bacteria that we need in our gut, to the soil, to space with the solar energies. I'm glad you raised the 5G layering of interference. We have to confront all these layers between us and nature. I want you to expand on this comment about your friends who have gone soft a bit on how the license limits expression. I've got a Zoom brainstorm tomorrow on repealing licensing with safe harbors, exemptions for integrative physicians, privatization with certification. And even my interviewer yesterday was saying, oh yeah, we want to allow off-label early treatment, but these doctors are afraid of being sued if they go outside the standards of practice. Can you expand on what I'm getting at? Is this very limited thinking of what practice standards are, behind which allopaths hide to escape liability, so that stifles the experimentation that we want them doing to figure out what's wrong with us. Have you thought a bit more about the limitation of licensing around standards and how that's really stifling care and allowing the chronic disease explosion to fester? Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and it's a surprising new field of interest for me. I never worked in a private healthcare organization. I worked at a major academic center, and so I didn't play those games early for the first 20 years of my career. And then once I got free of that, I started saying things out loud that I knew licensed docs were not allowed to speak. And so, I didn't want to jump through the CME hoops, and B, I was probably not ever going to write a prescription again in the first place, and didn't want to handle the onslaught. So I just let my license go. There are some very interesting forward-thinking providers. You guys are doing groundbreaking work, putting people in a place where they have direct care, direct access to providers. And we're going to see more and more of that. There is, you're familiar with the Children's Defense Fund and Robert F. Kennedy's work. And there's about to be an advocacy group there that I think will accelerate a lot of the America's Frontline Doctors work. And I have inside rumor that, and this is probably not too bad of a leak, that because we're about 6 weeks away from a very interesting fresh explosion that's been brewing for about 20 years of a provider network that has no infrastructure, right? It doesn't, but you're right about the dynamics. Docs, unfortunately, when a DSM code goes on the chart, in a lot of systems, they're not just protocol mandated, they are legally mandated within the system. That's how that ever got to that point, we don't know. That's a terrifying reality. That doesn't mean the patient actually has to take the medication, of course, but the doc is legally incapable of not prescribing the particular protocol that goes along with that DSM code inside the system. It's different all over the world, of course. I'm not anywhere close to an expert on those dynamics, but I do know. Well, since you mentioned 5G, let me just point. I wanted to suggest to people that there's a book called The Contagion Myth that was published very quickly last spring, a year ago spring, and Sally Fallon, who's the founder of the Weston A. Price Foundation, who largest soil, one of the more vibrant soil advocacy groups in the world. Weston A. Price advocate for real food, real kids, programs, et cetera, happy farms, happy animals. And she and a colleague wrote, wrote that book very quickly. And the interactions of 5G, and it looks very realistically like the maps of COVID outbreak very closely correlate with the maps of high smog 5G cities. And I don't remember what they are, but the cities that are high smog that rolled out 5G have the density, have the high spikes, quote, COVID. And so they called it electrosmog interaction, right? And it was a beautiful event 201. I don't know if you want me to dive into that at all, but we can do a retrospective on that over the next couple of decades, I think, and we can see that this has been building for many, many years. And here at probably one of the most profound interventions of life, right? It's when we intervened with the 5G rollout, we had to come up with an answer, right? They knew what was coming up. And so they came up with the answer fast and furious 5 years ago and planned this whole thing. And again, they have the microphone. Most of the planet, I think, knows this. I can't speak to, again, I wandered, I apologize. But the conversation itself, I mean, without coming up with the answer, this is the other thing I wanted to talk about in intuition. So gut health and the wisdom of the community of the bacteria, the wisdom of the community of the thing called the microbiome, leading to an ever regenerative and ever corrective neuro profile, neuropsychiatric connection with the planet, neuropsychiatric connection dynamics is similar to that social fabric, which also will create the process itself. And it's not about building the structure. We got lost in the physical structure of the body, thinking that there's a maturity to this thing called Tom, and that there's an aging process. And it, once it's mature, it's done. We got to protect it, and then there's a degeneration. No, we live in an ever regenerative state where we're connected. We're constantly regenerating and recuperating, and so it's not about the correct structure. It's about the correction to the structure. I call it metabolic flexibility. In the autonomic world, when you're talking about sympathetic versus parasympathetic, you don't want to be Om Shanti, center all the time. That's not reality. Interfacing the world, there are things to learn and there are things to unlearn. And the ability to live at the extreme, just like an athlete, extreme parasympathetic, totally ticked off, got to get away from the tiger. I'm a gazelle running like crazy, heart pumping, etc. Fight or flight. That's a skill set, but how quickly do you come back to center? And similarly, rest and relax, our parasympathetic tone. Again, a skill set, but how do you come back to center so all of a sudden you can be in the interface? All of that to paint the picture that the process itself is, I think, such a profound gift. And carrying this message and carrying this conversation is the gift. We might not ever know what the answer is to why did the docs go soft. We might not know, right? But calling a spade and realizing that that is the situation points us in the direction of a more constructive investigation.
Yeah, the conversation is a process, especially with some of our friends like yourself, Tom, and myself probably too. So we can always refine where the conversation goes to get more clarity later. Joe.
Hey, Dr. Tom, it's a pleasure to hear your story and your background. It's pretty cool, the things that you've done and how you've come to the belief systems that you've shared with us here today. And factually, as far as I'm concerned, I'm a big natural health guy, had a finance background, become a real enthusiast in it. So I love how you talk about the soil health and you relate it to gut and the connection to the neurology of how that all plays a role. I'm curious about your thought on probiotics, of like, you know, a lot of people like to take probiotics. How well do they live in the system? Or does it need to be a specific type of probiotic that can get all the way through the digestive tract and be a colonizing type of gut bacteria?
Great question. Thank you. Let me give just a quick definition of microbiome for folks who might not know. So micro is small, biota is life. We realized that inside the gut, inside the gastrointestinal tract, live many thousands of species of life, as I pointed to before. That those come from interaction, right? If you have an animal, if you have a pet, he went outside and he brought in some novel bacteria this morning. And if you have a kid who was playing in the yard, he brought in some novel bacteria. And if you have a mango tree in your front yard, you're bringing in some novel bacteria. So they come from the foods we eat. And when we talk about a wide variety of foods, people are usually surprised that I advocate 200 species of food. In addition to eating sterilized food over the years, we've also really shrunk the diversity of the plant species that we do eat. And it's not just the amount of broccoli that's important, it's how many different kinds of broccoli and as many different kinds of plants, fruits and vegetables. And again, you want them to be happy organisms grown from happy soil, as many different kinds, and also as many different parts and anatomical parts of the plant. So you want your roots, you want your stems, you want your seeds, you want your flowers. And each of them bring along a different platform. Each of them brings along a different readiness. So when we talk about prebiotic fiber, probiotics are the bacteria, and the microbiome is the life form. You can think of it as paint on a canvas, when prebiotic fiber is the growth medium. That's the canvas. And different species of plants have different dispositions for the growth of different bacterial species. So the reason to eat a wide variety of bacteria is so that you have the conditions, the predicate conditions for the growth of those different kinds of species. So all that said, you can chew and swallow. I mean, you can swallow capsules. And the answer to your question is no, I don't have a particular favorite. I have some formulations that I use, but I like a wide variety of probiotics as well. You want them to come from, credible sources, but you pretty much can't go wrong with probiotics. I suggest that people not have the same one for very long, right? You can have a cornerstone product that you rely on, but really it's great to mix them up, and it's great to take a break as well. But none of them work. They pass right through the GI if that prebiotic fiber is not there. Right. So the first order of business is the prebiotic fiber in itself. Given now that our diets are so lacking, we do have artificial prebiotic fibers as well, like inulin powders and things like this. And that's something I suggest too. There are really great. It's almost mandatory that people take supplements these days. Even folks who have a great diet, we're supplementation regimen. I suggest 5,000 plus vitamin D daily. So you want to, and again, not the same thing every day. I suggest folks go 50,000 units weekly. And similarly with a real good high quality omega supplement. Our omegas, our fat soluble vitamins are D, K, E, and A. And to the extent that GI tract integrity is working at a 10, we are generating what's called short chain fatty acids. So ketones, which are generated in the colon. Let me just say this too. Every level of the gastrointestinal tract has a different environment, right? So just like when you go on vacation, you're going into a different environment. That apple that's making its way down your esophagus is going to visit different terrain as it goes. There's a 2 point, we're supposed to have a 2.5 pH in the gut. We're supposed to have an acidic environment. We're supposed to have certain bacteria that grow in acidic environment. Something as simple as taking an antacid can change that dramatically. And then all of a sudden, we don't have that assimilative environment. And the apple that knows it's supposed to, visit the Louvre in a certain city, doesn't get to do the work in the tummy, and then all of a sudden it doesn't get to do the work in the duodenum and so forth. So all that said, as we become more alkaline with the progression down the GI tract, pH rises. There in the colon, there's an environment that is optimally to elaborate our ketones. So our butyrate, our hydroxybutyrate, our acetate, these are all called short chain fatty acids. And you can think of those as the pilot lights for the assimilation of all of our other lipids. Just like it's important to eat a wide variety of plant foods for prebiotic fiber, it's important to have a wide variety of lipids as well. And so you want different nuts, seeds, oils, and again, natural. Processed oils are ticked off. They're not happy. Even our restaurant grade oils are highly processed, high temperature, high pressure, et cetera. It's a very handcuffed molecule, right? The body thinks it's real. It looks like a lipid, but it's not real. And all of a sudden it gets deposited into the cell membrane. And our cell membrane is, remember your biology class, a bilipid membrane that's supposed to be flexible. And there's a lot going on there, right? The surface and every one of our 100 trillion cells in the body, again, doing a different job in a different tissue and has different expression based on the environment in which it finds itself. And so cell surface proteins are expressed appropriately for the petri dish in which they find themselves.
And
all of that happens.
The outside of that cell is fat too, correct?
The membrane, the actual, the coat itself is fat. So if this is the cell membrane, there are lipids with tails going in this way and lipids with tails going in that way. And then this whole thing is the shell, right?
And I bring that up to connect the dots between people eating bad fats and getting good healthy fats, right? Because if there's all the bad fats, then we're kind of replacing those cell membranes with, inflammation. So then there can't be the exchange from the inside of the cell to the outside of the cell, which then the inflammation creates the disease state. Is that how you would see that?
That's good explanation. Yeah. So a trans fat, the body identifies as a structurally useful, but it's got no life form. So it gets deposited in there, but then all of a sudden this cell, which is supposed to be doing the cell membrane dance, be very intelligent. I was lucky enough to have my cell bio professor in med school was Bruce Lipton, by the way, and he calls it membrane, B-R-A-I-N, right? So very, fascinatingly intelligent creature, cell membrane. And it's supposed to be hungry and curious, the way we were talking about our kids being hungry and curious. Lots of different things going on here. And yes, the things that are supposed to go into the cell surface proteins are not recognizing because they're lazy or toxic or slaughtered. And the things that are supposed to be going on in the cell probably go on in the cell, but no communication for the outside. And that's an autistic child, by the way. There's a cell that doesn't have the integrity to take what's definitely going on in there, right? Autistic kids are massively intelligent. There's a lot going on in there, but it can't get out.
That's profound.
I absolutely love that. And you brought up one thing, so I just got one more question, Charlie. When you talk about the acid and alkaline aspects of the stomach, and you brought up the duodenum, I have a chiropractic friend that I was always asking, is the stomach alkalizing or is the stomach acidic? Because he talks about the top of the stomach being acidic, but it has to be like 8 on the alkalinity scale for the duodenum to open for it to go through. Is his interpretation of that correct? Or do you agree, disagree? How do you think of that?
So a healthy, thriving body, I'll preamble it with this. The word ketogenic has been sort of shanghaied and proprietized over the years by a healthy, thriving body with that platform of short chain fatty acid generation competence. is ketogenic, right? So you don't have to artificially put yourself in a place where you need to create ketones. The body, as an organic interface structure, will properly reflect the pH necessary for interaction with whatever environment it's in, right? And so you don't want it to be the same. You want it to be a flexible and changeable, adaptable, based on what the conditions are. If you land in Beijing and all of a sudden you've got toxic interface with novel varieties of smog that you didn't breathe in Boston, you want to be a little bit more acidic that day, right? And then the dance, the internal dance will come back to center. That's the metabolic flexibility I was talking about. That might be a little bit of a skirting of your issue. I'm not wild on saying this is the way, right? I practice what's called functional medicine or bio-individualized medicine. And I have my favorite protocols. I just said about the vitamin D and whatnot. I have my favorite protocols and lists of supplements that I suggest to people. But it's different for everybody, and everybody's got a different life and a different menu of confrontations, and a different, let's say, a surprising evolution, right? Even with a success menu of thousands of patients, I'm curious as to how the one who's going to heal even more powerfully did it, right? And to the extent that we stick to protocol, I think we can come back. Well, let's put it this way, Joe. Is it if I asked you, you're a very awake guy, I can tell, right? You're very live and you're navigating a lot of forward regenerative. Would you, if you had a choice between, let's say you felt great yesterday, recreating the Joe of yesterday or recreating of
I'm constantly creating the Joe of tomorrow, because whether I'm 30 years old or I end up being 100 plus, my body is constantly making cells. So my protocol is that metabolic flexibility and dialing into healthy cell creation of who I'm becoming and who I'm being, right? If that helps with what you're going with there.
You got it. Nice. Yeah.
On that note, that leads to my question. And before I ask that, couple comments. The infrastructure of providers, without the infrastructure, Tom, you mentioned, keep me in mind, my commercial field of facilitating the independent healers out there through our appointment apps and whatnot. And second, you mentioned Children's Health Defense. There are a number of advocate organizations. They're great. I mean, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s name is a brand is crucial for health freedom. As you probably know, on the side, I lobby for the oldest health freedom organization, a National Health Federation, going back to the 50s. And our monthly Zoom is Friday at noon Eastern. I'll put the link in chat for those who want to join us. We're going to talk about the FDA's effort to COVID shot toddlers, as well as safe harbors to help expand the universe of healers, which could help that infrastructure you mentioned without an infrastructure. My question gets to what you and Joe were talking about, and that autistic patient you mentioned who was helped by the fecal transplant. But when he or she went back into his or her toxic environment, without keeping up with that daily improvement, he or she went back into her autistic, dis-ease. Are both, Kundalini yogis, and we have other practices. We're not wed to one protocol. And, we talk about that daily practice, that need to make a habit out of this regeneration process. how do you coach folks to keep up so they'll be kept up? Because I imagine that's a huge issue with healing, is folks getting back into their toxic environment.
That's a good question. It's as simple as looking in the mirror and saying hello. So I suggest that folks take a real good look at them at their journal, and it's not for the purposes of proving anything to the provider, right? I will often say to somebody, just see what it takes to write down everything you eat for the next week, and you don't ever have to show it to me. If it's embarrassing, you can burn it, but it's a really great glimpse in. I see Linda's question about how long does it take to recreate. That's the other thing to say to folks is identify a couple of things that are tormenting, that are tormenting, that if you could wave a magic wand a year from now, they wouldn't be troubling you. Are you addicted to sweets? Are you addicted to booze? Are you addicted to whatever? Can you not drive past the Golden Arches without swinging in? And have people identify a couple of things that they know they can't do right now, they can't let go of right now, but they'd like to see it in 2 to 5 years. Invariably, it works much more quickly. The recreative capacity and the just like we were talking about the fecal transplants, conferring an immediate metabolic competence, right? It takes, I tell people realistically, lifestyle change takes between 6 months and a year. And no matter how long standing the disease, right? It took many decades, but 6 months to a year is not because of a physiologic lethargy. It's because our habits change very slowly. They seem to change very dramatically sometimes when we have an intervention that we think is a profound something. But realistically, we don't change very much. And realistically, we're going to do pretty much what we did yesterday, today. And so I suggest to people, go to the Korean market, go to your local farmers. There's a great platform, by the way. I'll put a plug in for a platform called farmmatch.com. I travel a lot. I know my local farmers in my hometown. But when I'm traveling, you just go to farmmatch.com, type in a zip code. You can find local folks who are doing things nicely and well. And direct sales to consumer, right? Not part of an infrastructure or anything like that. And I think that's politically where we're going. I think we're going to see, finally, we get back to tribe. We get to know our local folks. We organically put together CSAs and whatnot. But as far as changing the diet right now, go to your local market and buy something you haven't eaten in a while. Buy a different food today, a different prebiotic fiber today that your body hasn't seen in a couple of years. All of those are what to do, but the most important thing is what to not do. And so in addition to identifying what you'd like to have on your plate, no trans fats, no processed oils. That's the big thing. Start to read labels. If it's something that you don't know about, it's not food. And at the very best, it's inert and most probably destructive, right? If it's not organic produce, it does come with glyphosate. And arguably, some think that glyphosate is so endemic in the water table that even organic comes along with a certain amount of it. But organic is a big deal, and a lot of times people don't want to pay the extra cost, but it's a big deal, and you're going to pay the extra cost down the road to the doc or for the surgery or whatever that is. To the extent that antibiotics, it's uncanny. I didn't know this when I was practicing, and I wish I could take back what I told my patients all those years. I thought it was responsible to let people know when they were going to be using a walker and when they were going to be in a wheelchair, right? There's power in those words. And it's also shrugging the shoulders of medical personal sovereignty and personal responsibility. But major antibiotic course, for whatever reason, thank God we have antibiotics and they're useful. But for what I see when I newly diagnose any autoimmune or new cancer or new metabolic syndrome, a year to 2 to sometimes 5 before has either been a major trauma or a major surgery or a major antibiotic course for some things. When you have surgery, you mandatory in-suite antibiotics, of course, but that's a nuclear war for our microbiome. It's gone. And so we started putting together a protocol aimed at surgeons for microbiome reconstruction, post-surgical microbiome reconstruction. And they get it. And I think that's a nice entry point into the medical community because, they're not going to lose their jobs. People are going to still want surgery. Everybody else is going to lose their jobs. So that's a long answer to the how quick does it rebuild? But it rebuilds to the extent of the hunger of the navigator. How hitting bottom is a blessing. And not only personally have we hit physical health bottoms, but we've hit a bottom as a social fabric here. And this is an opportunity to rebuild powerfully, quickly. I know we're at the top of the hour. I played with a little anagram for fascia. If you'll indulge me. Or Jimmy, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I do have a question. I have a real question. It's a real question. Yeah. So I'm a believer personally in, middle of the road, balance in everything, maybe kind of like you touched on. But I was listening to the other day to a dark field microscopist talking about how important it was, and a naturopath, how important it was to have legumes or beans, right, in your diet pretty much every day. And then I'm looking at paleo, and it's like, don't have any beans. They're really not good for you, right? Or the ketogenic diet. You've got all these things out there that are fashionable now. And it's still, it does throw me off a little bit. Maybe I shouldn't be eating beans, or maybe I understand, sure, keep the sugars down, the carbs down. But what's your take on that? I mean, where do beans fit in? And maybe some of these, I thought it was a major food group. I should have beans. What say you?
When we talk about epigenetics, we've still got this addiction to saying things run in families. Things run in families because we touch the same animals, we play with the same toys, we travel to the same thing, we breathe the same air, right? We're in the same toxic, moldy house. The separation dynamics that we were talking about before are the problem with food, and the solution is eat real, eat local. If it's in your backyard, eat it. If it's close by, eat it. If it was happy, eat it. I tend to advocate, 99% vegan, but eggs are fantastic. Make sure they came from happy critters. Make sure if you eat animals, they were happy animals. The human body does not need cholesterol. A healthy, thriving body with a microbiome generates its own cholesterol, as do all animals. And so eating animals brings along cholesterol. And if it was good cholesterol, again, it's part of a building block of that happy cell membrane. If it's a pissed off cholesterol, it is as equally handcuffing as the trans fats in that membrane, right? Just as an aside, because this is my one bandbox, I taper a lot of people off a lot of medications, and almost everything that people are on has to be responsibly tapered. And, the one thing that does not need to be responsibly tapered is a statin, and it's the most destructive. They are the most dangerous medications on the planet. And we've known that for many years. It's not a mystery. And still, the docs are mandated to prescribe them. But anybody who's listening who doesn't know, a doc that says, here's a statin, your cholesterol's too high, is essentially telling you you have no regenerative capacity. Today's as good as you're going to get, and it's downhill from here, right? You will degenerate, you will need another medication, you will have side effects. Dangerous drugs, they belong in the trash can immediately. But Yeah, and then it's eat local, eat real, and eat intuitively. And most people can't eat intuitively because that gut instinct, that intuitive sense, isn't there. But when you got the gut, then when you have a craving, it's probably real. It's probably something. I'm traveling this week. I was up in Jersey yesterday. I don't remember the last time I had a piece of pizza, but I was driving to a meeting and I wanted a piece of pizza. Stopped for a slice. I honored that, and it was fantastic. There's no right or wrong.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. Charles, I guess we could wrap it up or ask how people can get in touch with him.
Well, Linda has one last question. If you make it quick, Linda.
Yes, my problem. I have, because you made reference to autism, I have a genius 36-year-old son with autism. Absolutely genius. So the doctors, for any reason, like prevention, they prescribe antibiotics. Of course, I never give them to him. So my question is, this abuse of antibiotics, how long our organism does microbiome to recover from this insult of antibiotics? As we know, that 95% of human cells in our body belong to microbiome. How we can continue this crime against humanity? I cannot find another word. I'm listening to you.
Thank you. Yes, it is crime against humanity, and thank you for knowing it. It can happen quite quickly. Recovery can happen quite quickly, and the first order of business is stop the pipeline of abuse, right? So continuing to eat foods that are laden with antibiotics and continuing to expose ourselves to arguably even antibiotic laden. Well, let me just, I'll say one more thing. I have up here on my whiteboard, my anagram of the day for fascia. I used to think that gut brain, that microbiome itself, I work with a lot of regenerative conditions, right? So rebuilding the brain, and there's nothing happening in an MS patient's brain that's not happening in my brain. The difference is they have an inability to take out the trash. When you put gut in order, you've got a vibrant central nervous system. You've got a vibrant brain that's willing to let go, not just physically in the structural lymphatics, which are called the glymphatics in the brain. That's a drainage, and but also emotionally and spiritually, right? It's a willingness to let go. It's a willingness to not know and navigate forward. The support cells in the central nervous system are called glia, G-L-I-A. Maybe we can talk about that next time. But those are activated now. I used to just think it was gut-brain integrity. There is a third piece of that, and that is just like a car that's in the garage, a beautiful, well-tuned Mustang in the garage. If the key isn't turned and it's not put into gear, it's kind of worthless. And that's the other thing for recovering microbiome very quickly, especially post-surgical or post-antibiotic, is movement. And they now know there are stem cells in the connective layers in the fascia. And it happens both when we move, when we stretch ourselves, or with an exogenous, with a massage therapy, or a rolfing, or any kind of a yoga, like that. And that dynamic is probably true. I don't know about the stem cells in other tissues that behave that way, but that therapeutic works if there is gut-brain integrity, if there is microbiome integrity. A lot of the reasons a chiropractic adjustment doesn't hold is because the patient doesn't have the ability to internalize the therapeutic and come back to center quickly, right? Being able to handle the challenge, being able to handle the stress, the confrontation, the inflammation, and come back to center quickly is very important.
And Tom, how do folks reach you? Favorite website?
Sure. Email's best, thomasacklin@yahoo.com. That's a happy one.
And a couple projects that you're working on again?
This Garden to Table School Lunch program is, I believe, probably my most important piece of my career, and I don't yet know how to language it. My interestingly, when I declared the rejuvenation of it a couple of months ago, to a community that I work with,
Ora, prima,
my alma mater, University of Virginia, asked me to post a project, and so I posted the project, and all of a sudden had 12 brilliant, 20, 22-year-olds as interns, and they call me the mentor, but they are the mentor. My real project is, how do people of high skill set get out of the way? You were talking about being an assemblyman, right? You're somebody who puts people together. And how do we as leaders, no matter what our skill set is, step out of the way? And I'll probably be writing something about that, or putting some sort of a network together like that. And if anybody has any ideas as to what that should look like, that's, in my world, that's called Humanity as Organism Thrives. And I would love to brainstorm with folks about the emergent platform.
So what about your wealth? If your money could actually talk to you, would you listen to it? Well, with the DNA Network Academy, your money actually can talk to you. And it's going to tell you just what it told this client. This family had over 24 debts, mortgages, car loans, the works. They were on track to take 20 years to pay it all off, and instead did it in 8.5. Plus, they did it without refinancing, making more money, or even changing their lifestyle. So find out for yourself with a free analysis that is completely confidential. No personal information, no social security numbers, no credit checks, none of that nonsense. But what is exciting is that the outcome of that report you receive is a guaranteed outcome for you. To get that report, head on over to bit.ly/debt-to-wealth. You will arrive at this simple form. Fill it in, as simple as lender number 1 and credit card number 2. What really matters is the accuracy of your numbers. You'll be able to see that if instead of 20 years, or whatever your number is, that you may actually be out of debt and on your way to wealth in as little as 6.3 years, like this client.